Let's jump right into this explainer and unpack what has to be one of the most agonizing, just incredibly emotionally complex moments from the great Indian epic, the Mahabharata. We're looking at the story of King Nala and Queen Damayanti. But we're not going to cover their entire lives today. Instead, we're zeroing in on one single pivotal night, a night where a human mind just completely breaks under the weight of utter ruin. It is honestly a masterclass in psychological tension. As you'll see, it shows us exactly how a supposedly unshakable sense of duty, or dharma, can be corrupted, not just by evil, but by absolute soul-crushing despair.
Think about this unthinkable premise for a second. What on earth would drive a fiercely devoted king to abandon his innocent, sleeping wife all alone in a dangerous wilderness? I mean, these aren't strangers. They are profoundly, deeply connected. And yet he chooses to leave her in a place filled with wild beasts and almost certain death. That is the core moral dilemma we're going to dissect. We are going to trace the exact anatomy of this impossible choice. We'll break down his internal logic, the suffocating external pressures, and the sheer desperation that turns the unthinkable into a terrifying reality.
So to really understand this choice, we first have to understand the absolute pit of despair Nala is trapped in. This is a guy who has experienced a massive fall from grace. He's lost his entire kingdom, his friends, his allies, totally gone. Now, he's just wandering aimlessly in the unforgiving woods. And the crazy thing is, he actually has a way out. He could seek refuge in his father-in-law's kingdom, but Nala flatly refuses. Imagine the psychological weight there. The man who once brought so much joy and glory to that court literally cannot bear the thought of showing up as a symbol of abject misery. He thinks returning destitute would only bring his wife's family profound grief. So his pride isn't just a wounded ego here, it becomes the very cage that traps them in the forest and seals their grim fate.
Which brings us right to their immediate physical reality, and it is incredibly stark. They have absolutely nothing. They are exhausted to the bone by intense hunger and unyielding thirst. Their poverty is so profound that they are literally sharing a single piece of cloth between the two of them, just wandering the wilds until they simply collapse in a bare, dusty traveler's shed. The innocent, delicate Damayanti, a princess who has only ever known good fortune and comfort, finally surrenders to her exhaustion and falls into this heavy, profound slumber right there in the dirt. But Nala, no way. Nala cannot sleep. While she rests, his mind is wide awake, just churning in absolute torment.
Sitting there in the dark, watching her suffer entirely for his sake, you can see his psychological unraveling begin. The guilt of dragging this woman he loves into the mud is just eating him alive. Out of this torment, his broken mind creates a terrifying binary. He asks himself this truly harrowing question: is death the better for me now, or should I desert my wife? He is trapped in a mental cage, totally consumed by the guilt that she is only experiencing this extreme, life-threatening distress because of her unyielding devotion to him. In his mind, if she weren't with him, she wouldn't be suffering.
It's wild to see how a broken mind creates such a twisted moral ledger. He actually starts calculating the outcomes of this impossible situation. He reasons that if they stay together, distress and starvation are an absolute certainty for her. He has literally nothing to provide. But if he leaves her, he calculates that it's highly doubtful she'll just sit around in the woods. Separated from him, the literal anchor of her misery, she might wander back to her relatives. Because she is this highly capable, fiercely energetic woman, she might even find happiness and safety again. He is genuinely convincing himself that abandoning her in a forest of beasts isn't cowardice. In his deeply fractured logic, leaving her is an act of supreme mercy.
And that logical justification, it's exactly the opening needed for something far darker to take hold. At this exact moment of weakness, the text introduces the influence of Kali. Now, just to clarify for this context, we are not talking about the revered Hindu goddess here. This Kali is a malevolent entity, the wicked personification of the current age, who is literally possessing Nala's mind. Despair essentially invites this wickedness right in. Kali capitalizes on Nala's desperate rationalizations and seizes on his vulnerability. This sinister force tips the scales, warping those misguided, flawed intentions into a cold, unbreakable resolve to desert the woman he loves.
With his mind made up by this dark, supernatural influence, Nala's thoughts shift rapidly. He goes from philosophical anguish straight into chilling, cold pragmatism. Fixating on their lack of clothing, he realizes they are tied together by that one single garment they share. They are physically bound by their destitution. So he asks himself, how shall I divide this garment so that my beloved one may not perceive? To pull off this desperate plan, he realizes he has to physically sever their union while she sleeps, just to ensure she doesn't wake up and try to stop him.
The tension here builds so fast, and it is terrifying in its brutal step-by-step physicality. Nala starts pacing the shed up and down, frantically looking for a way out. And then, in a stroke of incredibly dark fate, he discovers a handsome, unsheathed sword just lying abandoned in the dust. Without a second thought, he takes the weapon. He cuts their shared cloth cleanly in half. He throws the sword away, and he flees. He literally runs from the shed, leaving her completely insensible, deeply asleep, and entirely alone. But here's the twist. The very moment the adrenaline of his escape fades away, his heart fails him. He actually goes back. The king returns to the shed, peers out of the darkness, and the sight of her just completely breaks him. That cold pragmatism shatters into a million pieces. He bursts into tears, finally realizing the sheer horror of what he has just done. He laments with this heartbreaking poetic sorrow. His beautiful wife, a woman who was once so sheltered and revered in palace life that neither the harsh wind nor the burning sun had even been allowed to touch her, is now lying forlorn on the bare hard earth, wearing nothing but a severed piece of cloth. Knowing full well what awaits her when she wakes up all alone, knowing she's going to have to wander through deep woods crawling with predatory beasts and venomous serpents, he offers this devastating final prayer. He calls upon the divine beings, the Adityas, the Vasus, the Ashwins, and the Maronis, to protect her. And you have to notice the profound, tragic irony here. He is literally begging the gods to protect his wife from the exact mortal danger that he himself is forcing upon her. He abandons his post as her protector, helplessly noting that her own virtue will just have to be her best guard now. At this point, his heart becomes an agonizing pendulum. The text describes his spirit as being rent in twain, swinging violently back and forth in the dark forest. In one moment, he leaves the shed, completely stripped of reason by Kali's malicious touch. But the very next moment, he's drawn right back to the cabin, pulled by his profound, lingering love and sorrow. Leaving and then returning, over and over. He's unable to fully leave, yet entirely unable to stay. Until finally, stupefied and utterly bereft of his own senses, he is dragged away permanently by Kali, forsaking his sleeping wife alone in the wilderness.
Which brings us to the ultimate question we have to ask ourselves after unpacking this explainer. We've seen Nala's crippling shame, his twisted, desperate logic, and that supernatural push from Kali that ultimately forced his hand. So, when good intentions are so deeply warped by extreme desperation and malevolent outside forces, is the one who leaves the true villain of the story? Or, in the face of absolute, suffocating despair, is he just another victim of the tragedy? It's a haunting question about accountability and the fragility of the human mind. And I'll leave you to ponder exactly where the true blame lies.